Hey there, nice to see you. Always nice to have you with us on the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program where we talk to reporters, writers, journalists, editors, authors, and I said that deliberately, and novelists. And we also, in our second segment, talk to writers and people who are doing videographers and filmmakers and artists and other people who put stuff out in the Bronx. So this is going to be a really interesting show. All our shows are interesting because we have a novelist, a speechwriter, an author, a storyteller, and a Bronxite. And that is Peter Quinn. And nice to have you with us, Peter.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here.
Let's just talk about now. There are two books we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this is the most recent, right?
That's the memoir that came out in September.
So Cross Bronx, a writing life. I wanted to ask you a general thing about being a writer. We'll talk about some of your past and the history and the speech writing, which is so significant. When moving about and living your life, how much of it is just living, or are you kind of always like looking at stuff and writing the book and saying, oh yeah, that'll work for my book, or gee, I had that interaction, maybe, then you're sitting on the bus or the subway or you're driving home and you're saying, that should be written about. How much of it is separate and how much of it is just, well, that's why I'm able to write the book, because I lived it.
Well, I never go around thinking that this is going to be part of the book. And I wasn't educated as a writer. I didn't know any writers growing up in the Bronx. It was a kind of foreign occupation to me. And I came to it late. I'd never written a novel. I sat down and I never went to a novel writing course. I started reading books by novelists I admired, writing out paragraphs. And that's how I learned to write novels. But I never really go around with a notebook saying, I want to put that scene in the book. But most of it is in my head. Like, I think I worked at for 2 governors and 5 chairmen of Time Warner. So I saw a lot of sausage being made, as Bismarck said, see sausage being made. And all of that comes out in the books. I mean, I think the more experience you have, the better writer you are.
Let's just a little perspective on what you have seen. And I've got this quote here: New York City isn't so much a setting as it is a character.
Right.
Maybe I'm going to substitute the words the Bronx instead of New York City isn't so much a setting. And I've asked many artists and writers about this sort of thing. How does the Bronx, aside from the subject matter, I mean, it's called the Cross Bronx, aside from the subject matter, how does the Bronx character play in your writing and in kind of the personality of what you're writing about?
Well, I think that the Bronx grounds you. You grow up around people who will tell you what they think of you right away. There's a lot of in your face. There's not a lot of pretense. There were no.
And you can't have thin skin, I'll tell you that.
Right. There were no snobs where I grew up. It was all kind of reality based, if that's something to say. William Kennedy once was talking about, he said there's a cynical humanism that people have who grow up in cities. And I would say, I saw great kindness in the Bronx. I also saw Bronxites suspect power. They don't bow to it. There's always like, who does he think he is? And he thinks his, doesn't smell. So I always love that about being the Bronx. You're upfront about things. That's what I think. And I wrote 3 detective novels with the character Fenton Dunn, who grows up in the Bronx. And he was kind of, to me, the embodiment of the Bronx. He's like tough, but inside he's decent. I always felt that about the Bronx, that people in the Bronx were really decent.
That you can be tough and still be a decent person.
Right.
I just want to ask you about kind of about the writing process. Now, you brought it up. I mean, I was certainly going to mention that you were a speechwriter for Governor Carey. I got it here, 1975 to 1982. He was governor, and then you worked for Governor Mario Cuomo. And wrote the historic speech that he gave at the Democratic National Convention. In the way that you have to write those things, compared to trying to write a novel, do you have to like literally get yourself in a room and lecture yourself and say, wait a minute, that's not what I'm writing now. That's what I've got to, and reorient your actual whole state of mind? Or are you frankly talented enough to just say, well, okay, now I'm writing this, now I'll write this?
I'm untalented enough to I always, a guy I knew, a real old New York press guy, Mike Patterson, said, there are only two kinds of writing, good and bad. And I never like switching to a different mode. People always said, how do you find their voice? I don't find their voice. I just write the best I can. I do listen to them, but I'm not like writing scripts for people who I don't feel, I feel I'm writing for myself. I feel, this is something I could give or would give. And at the same time, and there's a context, you can't use certain things for certain people. I knew somebody was almost fired from a studio job for putting Flaubert in a speech. And the guy pronounced it Flaubert. It was like, what the hell are you putting this in? So, yeah, it's realistic. Writing is hard. That's what people don't understand. It's really hard. And it's very isolating. You go in a room and, people used to say to me at Time Warner, when I retire, I'm going to do what you do. And I would say, oh, yeah, you're going to go in the attic and drive a nail in your head for
right, exactly.
But a full-time job.
You're a very detailed writer. I mean, you write intricately. Right. In other words, certainly in terms of the way this is written compared to other books. I got many of them around me of people who've been on the show, and we'll get yours up here as well. Something conscious, or that is just your style, and I'm sticking to it, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it's part of my training. I was trained as a historian. That's what I wanted to be.
Yes, that's right.
And I did a lot of writing articles. I was working for a doctorate, and it was always get into the facts, detail things. And I became a novelist, but I kept that grounding as a historian. And there's so much. One thing when I want to do research, I always found it difficult to get out of research because it's so interesting. The deeper you go into it, the more you find. It's like a rabbit hole. And for writers, research is great because you're always looking for an excuse not to write. And research is a great excuse. When I was writing Banished Children at one point, I went down the rabbit hole for about 6 months on plumbing, indoor plumbing.
That is this book right here.
600-page novel. It took me 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to me the style of writing, because I mean, I work every day in this media, and I know the difference between writing for TV versus, let's say, writing for, if I was writing a news story about something. So let's just talk about this. One of the things that came up, I believe, in an interview with you that I looked through, and somebody had said, how do you know when you're done? And you talked just now about how you researched, tremendously. How do you write a 600-page novel? How do you know when you're done? And I've asked this question to many artists as well, people who do paintings. It's like, one more. Oh, that's it. I'm done. How do you know that? How do you know with research that you're done? Or do you... It's
a Supreme Court judge said, I don't know. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. It's like you just know, you bring it to some sort of finish. That's a hard thing, to write endings to stuff.
This Cross Bronx, A Writing Life, is your memoirs.
Right.
You're still alive. You're still you're remembering this. I mean, you'll remember everything. Do you think about, maybe there'll be another, or do you not do that? I think it was John Lennon who said, I put things down on a piece of paper. When I have enough of them, I call it a book.
Well, I'll never stop writing, because William Kennedy once said to me, a definition of a writer is a person who writes.
Okay, that's fair.
So, and I think of myself, that's what I am. It's not something I do on the side, and it's how I fill my day, and it's how I find a lot of satisfaction and frustration. So I finished this memoir. I've started another novel. I'm 75.
You have started another novel.
Yeah, I can't help myself anymore. Please stop me before I write another novel. That's what I want to tell some people. But it's a great way to pass the day, and
or pass a lot of days.
Yeah. And, I wrote these detective novels, and one was set in New York and Berlin in 1938. And I didn't go to Berlin, but I went to the New York Public Library and got all the guidebooks from the 1936 Olympics. Wow. And it was a great kind of mental adventure, right? I was in my office, but I was in Berlin. I actually went to Berlin when I finished the book because I knew the Berlin of '36
Wow.
wasn't there.
Yeah,
I just
right. And you
see if I got it right.
and doing that, of course, gives you a perspective. You had brought this up just a moment ago, and I had it in the back of my mind in preparation for this. Um, as a speechwriter, how much of it is looking at Mario Cuomo and saying, I'm going to write his words,
Right.
or you writing your words and having him repeat them,
Yeah.
or do you find a balance? How do you make that determination when writing for somebody else like that, as opposed to writing your own memoirs?
Yeah. Well, writing for Cuomo and Kerry, they were both they were articulate men who wanted to know what they were saying. I rarely handed him a script and said, you're going to read this. We worked on it, like the Notre Dame speech and the convention speech. I have it in the memoir. It was a long process. It wasn't like, there was a myth that he spent 5 hours in the governor's mansion writing the speech. Well, that wasn't true. We spent a week writing and did all this testing of it.
Wow.
And, it was that ability to work together. There were other times I worked for other people. I just wrote the speech and they gave it. But Cuomo and Kerry was special. I think there's a special thing to politics. They have to move people much more than I did corporate speech writing for 20 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, they have to move people. They also have agendas maybe that you're not aware of. I mean, in terms of people that they have to keep happy, or
Right.
people
Yeah.
that they
Right.
quote unquote serve in some form or another,
Well,
or
I
people that
say,
they want to make sure to dig. I mean, it could be any, and I mean, as close as you might be to them, that might be a difficult thing.
yeah, well, the State of the State speech was always, it's a terrible speech. We should have to mention everybody, all these things. It's invariably it's like the State of the Union is a terrible speech.
Right.
There's a lot going against it, but something like Notre Dame or the keynote where you stand up and you're appealing to a national audience. It's kind of it's intimidating at the same time. You're trying to find a baseline that appeals to people.
We're almost out of time. I just want to remind people, check out Peter Quinn, the Cross Bronx, A Writing Life. I found some of myself in there, and I think that Bronx people will feel the same way. We didn't get really a chance to talk to Banished about this. You also have that 3-part trilogy that you referenced earlier. Look up author. There's somebody else named Peter Quinn, I think, in the Defense Department.
Oh, yeah, I think he's in jail, actually.
Oh, really? Well, then that's not the guy we're talking about, but look up Peter Quinn, author, and you'll get all these books. And
NewYorkPatty.com. They can get my website.
There you go. We'll put that up on the screen. Again, Cross Bronx, A Writing Life. Peter, thank you for doing all that writing and doing all that perspective on our homeland. And keep going. We'll keep reading.
Yeah. Viva El Bronx.
That's how we feel. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to do a different kind of media, a reporter who does videos with elected officials doing things that you wouldn't expect elected officials to be doing. So don't go away.